Hi everyone! Welcome to a very special live episode of How to Make Climate Change Sexy. We're coming to you from the Art House after a screening of Spirit of Place, a stunning meditation on urban nature, identity, and of course, Wellington boots. Tonight I'm joined by Spirit of Place director Jack Cooper Stimpson, along with actor and sustainability advocate Danusia Samal from The Green Rider, and the actor Freya Mavor. Together, we'll be diving into what it means to green the film industry, not just in the stories we tell, but in the way productions are run behind the scenes. A huge thank you to everyone who came out for this event, and to our friends at Punchy Drinks for keeping us refreshed, and the Art House for hosting us. Now let's get into the conversation. Okay, I think we're going to start with some intros. So if you could tell the audience who you are and what you do.
Heya, my name is Freya. I am an actor. I dabble in writing and filmmaking, and I'm also a passionate rock climber and climbing instructor. So that's me.
I'm Danusia. I'm an actor and writer, and I also co-run the Green Rider campaign, which is sort of actor-led campaign to use our cultural and contractual influence to change the way that TV and film is made.
Hello again, my name is Jack. I'm a writer, director and environmental campaigner.
And a question I always ask everyone on the podcast is, how did you get into being interested in the climate space? Because I feel like a lot of the time when I see people, I just assume that they've always been interested in it, and I forget that we're all on our own journey. So did you guys have a turning point, or is it something that's always really been in the background for you?
I suppose I've been lucky in the sense that I've got a mum who's very kind of politically active, and therefore there is a number of things that I was taught to be concerned about from a young age, which creates potentially a slightly anxious child. But because of that, I feel like I've got this memory of learning about acid rain and being like, what the heck? And being like, what, I can't go out and stick my tongue out anymore and catch the rain. But I think the overwhelming concern thing, I think most people probably have a moment where they read the science and get a bit scared. And I think there was a point in my life where I was trying different campaigns on, trying to find a group that I felt I could do something active with. And then I found this group called Equity for a Green New Deal, who are a group of actors who are concerned about the climate and then are working within our field to see what we can do. So things like moving our pension away from funding fossil fuels, or working with theatres to try and make them greener. And then through that group was actually, what about TV and film? And seeing as this is an area that I feel like I have some understanding of, maybe I can make some real change there, rather than I love going on marches. I enjoy the feeling of solidarity and the feeling of a community who are trying to push for something, but you can kind of leave those being now what do I actually do on a day-to-day basis? So I think it was kind of meeting that group that turned my concern into something a little bit more active.
I kind of got involved through political activism as well, I suppose. I had quite kind of hard awakening at that sort of birth of Extinction Rebellion, when I'm sure a lot of people kind of suddenly got very engaged or were just aware of the subject matter and the topic in general. And I just got kind of unhealthily obsessed with it and spent 6 months with Extinction Rebellion learning all about the end of the world, and made a film about them, and a scripted comedy piece, because I didn't want to give up the day job really, and I couldn't kind of afford to go full-time and become an activist full-time. And then became quite committed to making films about climate change and nature, and how do you convey that story. Then Extinction Rebellion kind of died a death, and that wasn't the best thing and the best use of time anymore. And stopped thinking of myself as kind of an activist in any sense, and have been sort of transitioning to being a campaigner, whatever that means. I don't really know what that means, to be honest, but that's what I'm trying to be, and surrounding myself with people like these lovely people here, and learning and trying to, just trying to put as much of it into the films as possible. But kind of a political entry point as well.
As you might imagine, seeing as I said I'm obsessed with rock climbing, I love rocks and have always loved rocks and rock pools. So I think from a very young age, I had a deep sensual obsession with the outdoors. But in terms of becoming more sort of active or activated, it definitely was also, I think, in 2019, when there was this big sort of onslaught of action and getting involved in civil disobedience. But a turning point or person for me, I think, was my best friend, who, you always have that friend or a person whose moral compass sort of puts yours to shame. And I think having someone who was, I think who had that sense of her values and her drive, and also having someone to go along to things with, I think was very inspirational and also made these things a bit less intimidating. So that would have been a turning point for me.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, like the social element of it. And I think that's something that's really big in what I want to do with Sexy Climate Change, because I'm also the same. It was kind of 2018, 2019, being at uni, people camping at Marble Arch and like the bridges with the trees and just it being so fun. And I think that was such a turning point for building community, was actually having fun with it. And obviously it's a difficult issue, but you don't want to be miserable all the time. Danusia, you mentioned the Green Rider and you mentioned kind of the cultural and contractual element of it. I was wondering if you could expand on that and tell the audience what the Green Rider is, what you guys do, because you're slightly different from Equity for New Deal, aren't you?
Yeah, we're born out of that group. So Equity for a Green New Deal, as I mentioned, is actors who are concerned about climate change. But I actually think the remit of that group is kind of broader, like we're engaged in political things as well, and have been involved in a sort of Palestine solidarity movement. So the group is a kind of, it has its fingers in many pies, but our campaign kind of grew out of that and then became its own entity because we also wanted to be able to reach actors who weren't necessarily with Equity, production companies, people not in the UK, and we wanted to be able to work more nimbly because as a affiliate of the union, there were certain rules that you guys don't need to know any of this, it's not particularly interesting. But the Green Rider campaign is, we are in a really interesting moment where there's been a lot of hunger and interest in changing the TV and film industry because basically it has to. What's nice to know is that that movement will happen, but what we can do as performers or people working on screen, not just performers, is make that happen a bit faster and make it happen on our terms in a fair and just way. So that's a lot about what our campaign does. In a really practical sense, it's about an actor like using, like when the moment comes when you're signing a contract, is about you trying to negotiate with production to make the set a bit greener, to ask for certain things. And we're in a kind of interesting moment at the moment where we're trying to work out how to make that both a really big grassroots movement and also asking big stars to push for stuff, because that really changes the game. So we've had a few big stars advocate the campaign and then go into a film shoot and ask for something that basically means that the rest of productions in that studio are now all going to be run on green energy, or everybody in that production is going to eat more sustainably because the star asked for it. There's that level of our work, and that gets a lot to happen very fast. But we're also trying this year to really build the community. So if there's anyone out there that's interested in this, please like hit me up, because it's about making it clear to the industry that performers care about this. And even if all you end up doing is taking the train on the job that you're working on, but you make clear to production that that's a priority for you, it kind of tells this story that actors aren't this sort of pampered, disinterested group who don't care about being kind of engaged in climate or any other political issue. So we're just kind of like working to change that narrative.
I think the thing I really like about the campaign is a lot of the time with actors, I'm assuming you get asked to advocate and be the voice of something. And I think this is such a nice way that you can actually make direct and tangible impact in what you're doing. And I was wondering, Freya, because you're part of the Green Rider, like for you, how did you feel about joining? Were there any concerns that you had, or how do you feel about the campaign?
No, I mean, there were no concerns. I think it's always interesting as an actor going into very different projects and different productions. There's always it's the way it works within acting. There's a kind of a hierarchy of power and influence. So yeah, if you're the lead, you hold a lot of responsibility, or you hold like the power in that instance. Whereas if you're coming in for 2 days in a big production, it's, I think, harder to feel like you can say something, or if that's appropriate, or if you're not just going to get told to shut up. So I think there's that, which is just the nature of acting work as well. Like it's, you don't have the same position on every job, and you're also often unemployed. But I think, like it's interesting with the Green Rider, because it's, when it comes down to it, it is kind of simple. It seems like the obvious things that need to be flagged. So transport, food,
energy.
Energy. And then I'm guessing, obviously all the other ones which you have less influence as an actor, but I still think are really interesting to bring into conversation, are everything from like set design to how you think the sets are then being discarded. I did that on a job where I did recently, where I was asking them what they were doing with their materials afterwards, if they were being reused or if they could be picked up by friends who are designers and they could use those materials for a different project. But it's such a broad thing. And I think as an actor, you obviously have access to a certain amount of these decisions. But I think a lot of it happens much more on production and the creation of these projects, sort of at their conception.
Yeah, and actually just to tag on to that, one of the things that we're really hoping to do with the campaign is make it big enough that it's like a protective layer for actors who are putting their heads above the parapet. If you're not the superstar, but the campaign is well known enough and advocated by enough people, then you can say to production, I support this movement and I'd like to see what provisions could be done in the way that I'm working on this shoot and not feel like you're saying something crazy. And that work's happening. So Equity are working to negotiate green rider clauses into our collective contracts so that it becomes a normal thing. But also there's a kind of cultural movement building so that eventually we're kind of hoping it becomes the way that intimacy directors suddenly became just the norm in our industry. It happened really quickly. It was very necessary and it's made a really big difference. And we've seen that model work. So that's sort of what we're pushing for, to make it feel really safe to ask for things that really should be happening anyway.
And I guess what's really interesting about Spirit of Place is it was, correct me if I'm wrong, the first film to use the Green Rider. So being a bit of a guinea pig with the Green Rider, Jack, what were some things that you found actually surprisingly easy about implementing it, and what were some challenges?
Yeah, we were the first film to use it, which is a nice thing to say. Like, it's really cool to be like, yeah, we're the first people to use the Green Rider. I know lots of the talent were really pleased about that, and it made sense for obviously the context of the project, it being set in and around nature, in very fragile kind of ecosystems. And one of my producers is in the room, so I'm wary of saying it was easy to do, because I know there was a lot of admin that sort of is tacked onto that, a lot of conversations, because we were the first project, perhaps, because when you're talking to agents, I was only privy to some of the email chains, but people go, yeah, we agree with this in principle, but why do we have to sign a contract? And, you kind of go, well, that's kind of the point of it, is you have to, it has to be binding, But I can understand why there was a little bit of hesitation there. But once everyone's on board and, look, it does help if Mark Rylance is championing it. He'd already said, yep, I want to do this. Also, they were bespoke as well. That was the amazing thing about the Green Rider that I thought was just, again, very obvious, was if you have something that you're just I don't feel comfortable with this certain aspect of it. So I think I'm allowed to say this. So Mark really wanted a printed script. And obviously I'm not going to tell Mark Rylance he can't have a printed script. So he had one, which, technically I think does go against the Green Rider, but that's fine in the grand scheme of things, because he also had, green travel and, lots of other things that balance the book, so to speak. So I think once you explain it to people and get everyone on board, it feels like a collective movement. And it is satisfying when everyone is pushing in the same direction, and, it's accountability. You have sustainability coordinators involved in the project, and you have to be really certain that every decision you're making is not going to send your carbon footprint kind of through the roof. But yeah, it was okay. We did it. Thanks, Izzy. Thanks for doing it.
But also we've created a new tagline, which is progress, not perfection. And the whole point is that it's works to people's circumstances. We've worked with people who have like small kids who live far away, and they're like, look, my kids are in another country and I'm going to have to fly back to, obviously, right? But it's about like, what's the max you can do on this project? And maybe on this project, for some reason, you can't do a certain clause, but maybe on the next one, it's going to be a bit easier. So it's not about people feeling like, I can't take part in that at all because there's things in there that I just won't be able to do and I don't want to be called a hypocrite or whatever. We're trying to make it just like as clear as possible that it's about individual circumstances. It's about pushing for the best you can do. It's about asking for more from production to make it easier. But it's not about sort of being the cleanest and purest, most greenest, vegan, hemp wearing, whatever that you can be. It should be really inclusive and it should be possible for most people to do.
And where do you guys feel like the most resistance is to this change? Because I guess it's a time in which the film industry is slightly in turmoil, but it's also a massive chance of opportunity with all of the new studios being built and kind of the shift to more like Netflixy, online, straight to subscription video. Do you feel like the resistance to greening the industry comes from agents themselves, or is it studios, or is it funders of projects?
It's just like deeply habitual, isn't it? We're taught to think that things are important. Like for a very long time, talent on film sets and TV shows have had like their own travel. And that's been seen as like the best possible situation to be in as an actor. And that's what your agent will like fight for. And yeah, obviously there are situations where that's just going to happen. That will happen through circumstance. But it's just, that doesn't make sense. Like, you know, it's nice to travel to work with your colleagues, and that's not a mad thing for anyone to do. But it's just a weird habitual thing that the industry's kind of got in this mad like death loop about. And building everything from scratch, like not recycling sets and props. And, you know, Danusia, you told me that story about, was it a hoodie or like some shoes?
My broken down hoodie being recreated by a costume department, which obviously they need multiple copies, but just a really mad moment of being like, but I have it on. Do you not just want this? And like 7 people buying 7 different, and then keeping all these clothes that nobody used again and all that sort of stuff. And you're right, it's a lot of it is habitual. It's about thinking that it has to be done that way, and everyone being frightened about job security as well. Everybody is in the same, you know, there are very few people who work in the screen industry who have like fixed contracts and are super safe. So the person working costumes scared that if they change the way things work, they're going to get in trouble. The runner is scared. The director's probably scared. And it's just kind of that sort of thing. If the movements become big enough, people kind of go, okay, I'm not an individual, I'm part of something. And then it's not quite so scary. And I think then you can take those steps and do things that feel a bit frightening at times because they're different from how it has been.
I think there's also this idea that often art or creative industries are pure in some way, and they're really not. They're, you know, big businesses and industry that's deeply entwined with capitalism and demand for profit. So until these things become, I think if productions, which they always do, as every industry does, believes that they are or knows they are time poor and money poor, they're going to do what's quick and cheap or easy, because doing things maybe more sustainably seems like it's going to be slower or more expensive. Then it's just these ideas or these realities need to change in order for it to be appealing for a massive streamer to, I don't know, green light, fully green production, and then rethink how these things are done in big studios with sets that are, I don't know, like I did a job that we all ended up getting fired from because they needed to claim money, but their business needed to claim money back on tax. And all of the sets just got like destroyed and burned. And being part of that it's just awful. It's so awful. The absolute waste that goes into some of these huge productions is, really mind-bending.
Yeah, and set reuse is really hard to do because I think talking about the business side of things, a lot of theatre productions, their set is protected by IP. So you can't just kind of go in and pull it out. They get quite precious about the reuse of it. So I guess an initiative like the Green Rider is also helpful to overcome that sort of approach. I think something I get frustrated with when I go to a lot of climate events is a lot of people say, we need more storytelling. And then they don't really explain what they mean and they leave it at that. And I think something that's really important is understanding why people say we need more storytelling. And it's really about shifting what's seen as acceptable or normal. Like it's a big part of how to make climate change sexy, because I think climate needs to be a sexier voting issue in a way that a politician's actually happy to put their neck on the line and advocate for some real interesting and effective policy. Like even in the screen industry, there was an act in 2003 that mandated that 25% of production from big broadcasters like BBC, ITV had to be with independent studios. And that's kind of led to the boom that we see now in production in the UK, because you have this environment of nurturing. And I think that's something we have to do with the green stuff as well. I guess on the topic of environmental storytelling, it's very difficult to balance entertainment with something serious, with also not feeling like you're kind of bonking people on the head with a very like prescriptive message. I was wondering for each of you, is there anything that you've seen recently, aside from Spirit of Place, that you feel like does a good job of this?
That is so hard because I want and crave that content so desperately. And like through our campaign, we go to like a lot of climate-y stuff and watch production companies be like, here's our sizzle green reel. And then there's like these really cringe things as people like, put that in the recycling. And they're like really horrible bits of dialogue that really like stick out and just stink. So I think like I'm not coming to mind with something really quickly, and probably I'll walk out of this door and be like, oh my God, I loved that film. But I think the fact that I can't means that there is a big gap. And this is why films like this are brilliant, because it's so interwoven in the story. It doesn't clang out. And I think we kind of need both things to happen. So we need like big budget Hollywood movies where there's kind of subliminal storylining. We spoke to one production company where they're like, everything in all our TV shows, all the food is never in packaging. It's just like in glass stuff and out. And that feels tiny, but it's also like, it's a very subtle storytelling thing, which we probably need alongside films that are completely about climate content, as in that's the story, alongside characters who are motivated by that throughout the show, alongside how the shows are made and the production companies and actors talking about how they make it. And I sort of feel like all of that then becomes storytelling. But I haven't answered your question because I can't think of a good
it is hard, isn't it? I mean, Don't Look Up, I think, was the kind of climate film. Bit of a name drop coming up, guys. I actually was at a Q&A for that film, and Leonardo DiCaprio came out on stage, and it was this kind of incredible moment. And obviously he's been this incredible like climate person, activist, I don't know quite what the word is, but he's been very vocal about it. And he was like, yeah, I'm so pleased to have like made the climate film finally. And it was like, babes, you haven't done that. Like, this film was about like 10 other things as well as climate, but like it felt very confused. So I feel like we still need that thing, you know, the kind of the TV series or the film that we can all kind of get behind, I suppose, because there's lots of like nature content, and that, like, the Spirit of Place is nature. It's not climate change. It's related. It's about our relationship with nature, and wetlands have an incredibly important role in the fight against climate change. And that was a big part of the research and development of the story, was understanding that and me researching that and getting to know it and working with WWT to try and get that into the story and, you know, drive some interest there. But yeah, nature and climate, I don't know, it's complicated.
I'm also going to be boring and answer no. As in, I think the one thing that's really interesting is that like story lines and our own stories of the future or futurity feel very binary. They're either in we're fucked or we're not fucked. So it's either this complete dystopia or it's like a utopia, and there's not this sort of middle space, which is where we need more stories or where we need more, I don't know, use of our imagination to occupy that middle space. One thing I did read the other day, which I found very interesting and slightly dystopian, is that I don't know if anyone else saw this, they're using the Ministry of Defence, I might be bastardizing this, but the Ministry of Defence in the UK are working with sci-fi writers for future policy making to address potential crises. And I thought that was so bizarre and terrifying and weird, but they're bringing in sci-fi writers into policy-making rooms to imagine potential futures and outcomes. Yeah, narrative has a strong role to play, clearly.
After the panel, we opened the floor to some audience questions, and unfortunately, instead of giving them a mic, I let them shout, which means that we don't have their questions on the audio track. So imagine that I'm the audience asking a question. So the first question was, what brings you hope?
Honestly, I'm not just saying this because they're in the room, but Green Rider and organisations like that. Like, it feels like there's such an appetite for that within the industry. I think it's the antidote to a lot of greenwashing that goes on within the industry as well. I feel like there have been a few things, won't name them, but like there have been a few organisations that have kind of tried to do similar things before, and it just hasn't quite worked out, should we say. So and that gets me out of bed in the morning to like feel like, okay, I can do my job and also like hopefully send the right message, I don't know, whatever, and developing projects and being able to kind of signpost the Green Rider to producers is really exciting. So that does give me a lot of hope, yeah.
I think there's a kind of core of 3 and a new person now as well. And then there's this wider network of actors, this Equity for a Green New Deal group. And that group, I remember when I first found them, telling my family that I'd like found my tribe, because I was like, I think I know what I can do now. And I think that's what's getting me up in the morning, is like, actually, we all within our lives and industries can probably find ways to make things better. And that works for every industry. You could work in any job and do that. And that kind of feels quite empowering, that anyone could become a campaigner, and, you know, you could be a campaigner librarian, like you can make libraries greener if you want, I don't know. But that feels really empowering. And the fact that through that work, we've met really interesting people who are working incredibly hard and have been campaigning for a long time, that feels good. That feels like there are people out there who really want this to happen and will make it happen. And yeah, I think what feels nice about our campaign as well is that we are trying to push for like something really broadly appealing that really changes our industry. But it also is just like 3 socialists who are like, shh, don't tell them. We're just trying to make it a little bit fairer as well. Shh, don't tell anyone. And that gets me out of bed in the morning, because I feel like, I hope and pray, and I think we will stay uncompromised in like trying to make sure that this campaign never becomes something that's about like saying you're doing it and not doing anything at all.
Might be a strange answer from me, but maybe the fact that there's still always beauty and kindness, even in the most horrendous of situations. And there's some kind of hope in that. So no matter how kind of bad things are or could get or might get or are currently, there's still people being kind to each other, and there's still moments of great beauty. And, you know, it sounds like a very wanky response, but it's, you know, it's also true. And I think holding on to that and like, embellishing that is also a survival mechanism.
I think for me, it's finding community, like all the people that I know that are working in this space and like pushing from all sides. I also run a book club with Diora over there. And that's such a lovely thing every 6 weeks, just like sitting with people who have read what you've read, who are feeling what you're feeling, and you don't feel quite as alone in it. And then you start to feel hopeful because you see, actually, obviously it's a disaster, but a lot of people have the desire to be part of it. And then if it gets really bad, probably yearning for the ponds. I'll probably be in like Hampstead Heath having a really cold swim to try and numb myself out to it all. So I did love seeing like Mark Rylance in this film having a bad day and just like stood there kind of zoning out. And the second question was, what were the main practical things that you implemented to make production more green?
Spirit of place. It's all of the obvious things. So energy, transport, food are the kind of three ones. So that means cutting down on like lighting was like a first port of call. I mean, we had a lot of natural light. So, I mean, we didn't need a lot of lights, admittedly, but that was a very early conversation, was just not bringing in generators and just an unnecessary amount of kind of overkill in that department. And you save a lot of money there, which is also good. Transport, cast traveling together to and from set. Everyone was really up for that, which was really helpful. And geographically, it kind of worked out. So it wasn't pushing the carbon footprint up by cars zigzagging around or whatever. And having vegan options on set. Again, you don't kind of force people to do that. People are adults. They can have a bacon sandwich if they want. Like, that's fine. But just creating those kind of options. And it sounds so basic, I know. It's like, yeah, get rid of that, you know, vegan food, like really? But like, even that creates an enormous difference on a shoot like that, where it would have been so easy to have taken the very, very easy route of like, yeah, eat what you want, travel as you want, like, fine, whatever, let's just get the job done. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I'm sure I'm missing some more precise things, but, and not offsetting as well, not kicking the can down the road. It's like, that sort of, I'm sure it drives us all nuts, that kind of like, you know, oh yeah, we're going to go and plant 100 trees at the end of this thing. It's like, that's lovely, but it's really not going to offset anything. It's just like offsetting's not a thing. Be, you know, honest and make those decisions in the moment. That was kind of the ethos, I suppose. And costume, hiring costume, not buying things.
And the final question was from Joy Lee from Earthrise. She said, my question is more about the kind of narrative around climate change and what you guys find to be effective. I also work in the climate change narrative space, and it's been really interesting to see the shift in how audiences are responding to climate change. I think now we see a very big difference in how people understand the issue, as opposed to a few years ago. I think the majority of people have some level of awareness, but it feels like we've also reached a tipping point where people are feeling disillusioned and disempowered. And so when I think about films, I also have trouble thinking of climate change films, even if I'm working within the space. When I think about Don't Look Up, for example, you know, there's a question that I have of, it's already preaching to the choir. Do you think that these narratives are more effective when they're very explicitly about climate change? Or do you find that narratives that are more about normalising the issue in very subtle ways work better?
I kind of feel like it's necessary in down all avenues. So like working on sort of screenwriting jobs, if I have something put on my desk that's got absolutely nothing to do with the issue, I will see if I can find a way, not to crowbar it in, but to see if there's like a character or a storyline that feels like a natural thing to happen. And I think we need that I think we need that in a James Bond film as much as we need a kind of grassroots film about a version of Extinction Rebellion and that sort of thing. So I sort of think we want it in our broad appeal shows, or we really need it because those are the things people watch, and people watch TV for escapism and they watch it to relax and they watch it for the characters they love. So we don't want to start just making loads of like earnest stories that nobody wants to see. But I also think we need those things too. And I think we need them there so that someone can go, I'm actually beginning to care about this. Could I watch a film about it, just to start like growing my interest? when we're talking actually about moments of activation, I remember watching that film Age of Stupid with Pete Postlethwaite, and he's like talking through the world ending. It's terrifying, but it was like a real moment for me and has stuck in my mind for like the rest of my life, and it's something I kind of come back to regularly. So yeah, my belief, and also through the work we're doing, is I really think it all kind of needs to happen synonymously. And I think we will start having more climate change films, because TV development is always like 5 years behind what needs to get made. So like we're all writing our climate change scripts now, and then in 8 years are going to get made when it's too late or something. But I think that will all happen. And then I also think the work we can be doing now is like getting it into the things that are already out there and already have fans and already have a big audience.
Yeah, on that, just your question, which is great. I literally just thought about this now, but the things that at the moment, because I'm watching and I'm obsessed, like everyone is obsessed with the traitors, right? Like people just gobble that shit down, or same with absolutely mind obliterating shows like Love is Blind. So how do we get something like that but make it about the climate, or some kind of show where you have like a reality setup, but it's about engaging people in questions around imagining a future, imagining kind of, I don't know, possible avenues to address climate change? How do we get the traitors and climate change to meet? But it's true. It's what people watch.
I mean, you may or may not have opinions on it, but there was an interesting thing where Love Island moved from having like Boohoo sponsor them to eBay. And then the whole thing was about secondhand fashion. And I'd love to know what the real world impact of that was, whether that made loads of people rethink their buying habits. But it's an interesting idea to think like a hugely watched show that is a lot about clothes. If you make the sponsor something that's about secondhand, like what will that do? And I don't know what data they have from that. I'd love to see it, but it might be interesting that maybe it was really effective. I don't know.
So I think that was an amazing example, like you said, of kind of like an eat your greens approach, getting it into spaces like reality TV or things you want to watch. Like I think genre is such an interesting space. We met up earlier this week and we were talking about like, what does a action hero film look like if it's climate-y? And that sounds, I think because no one's done it, it sounds kind of like, oh, that's ridiculous. But then you think about Black Panther and the Afrofuturism in that, and how like it was so good at conveying the message of that campaign in that space. And I think we need something like that for climate. I'm also at the moment kind of working in like development for projects. And I think climate narratives is things that people are really starting to talk about. I do that work with Michelle, who's here. And Michelle was teaching us last week about how people need to see action to do action. And a big part of my like research when I was at uni studying climate stuff was looking at parasocial relationships that exist on screen. So your favorite influencer, your favorite actor, your brain can't really distinguish them between your friends. So if you see someone like that who's actually doing the thing, you're far more likely to do it. Like Freya, you mentioned earlier, having a friend who has this like superior moral compass. It's like, that's how they act in your brain too. So I think it's so important to see people on screen that we're familiar with. And I think, yeah, really moving into like massively different spaces. Like I feel like if Molly May decided that she wanted to show us her Vinted haul, that would make a massive impact.
Just to add as well, I feel like if anyone in this room wants to make anything about climate change or nature, whatever, go and pitch it. Because so often I go into meetings with production companies and they don't have anything on their slate that's even remotely about this stuff. And they're quite kind of like up for taking the stuff and optioning it, buying it, whatever, or getting you to write a script. Like, it's really, there's like rich, fertile soil there. It feels like everyone is looking for that thing. And I think Danusia's right. I think, yeah, TV is often 5 years behind, film's probably about the same. But yeah, like, I just get out there and like pitch it, talk to people about it, try and get it out there. Because, yeah, quite often the companies are very much like, oh yeah, we hadn't really thought about that yet. Or like, oh yeah, you can do that. Great, fantastic. There's a bit of relief about that. So yeah, I find it quite encouraging actually. And genre, yeah, I think is also going to be really helpful.
That was such an inspiring conversation about storytelling, sustainability, and the future of the greener film industry. A massive thank you to Jack, Danusia, and Freya for sharing their insights, the Art House for having us, and Punchy for being our drink sponsor. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out Spirit of Place and follow The Green Rider to learn more about making film production more sustainable. And of course, don't forget to follow Sexy Climate Change on Instagram and your favourite podcast platform to stay in the loop for future episodes and events. As always, thank you to Tanya for editing the podcast and DJing at the live event. This show relies on your support, so every like, share, comment helps it to grow. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.